Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our Real Talk session on financial services, how blockchain applies to data as a currency. We're going to get started, but just before we do, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping rules. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that you can engage with us throughout the session. There's a chat feature and Q&A through the On24 console. And so we'll be taking your questions at the end. We'll be looking at them throughout. So hopefully we'll get to them. And if we don't get to all your questions, we'll definitely answer them post this webcast itself. Also, the recording of this session will be available within 24 to 48 hours, and we should be sending you a notification on that. And also, I just wanted to make sure that you knew that the additional resources are available to download directly from the On24 platform. So with that, I'd like to actually get started. My name is Rimi Butra. I'm Vice President of Industry Marketing at Snowflake Computing. And I have a very special guest here with me, Kevin Maynor, Solution Architect at Snowflake Computing. Welcome, Kevin.
Good morning, Rimi. How are you?
Good, thanks. So Kevin has over 21 years of data management, data warehouse, data analytics experience. 7 of those years are within the financial services industry sector, working with a lot of different FinServ companies, credit card companies. So I'm very happy to have Kevin here with me. The format of this session and these webcasts is to keep it down to 30 minutes. But I'd like to kind of open it up and have a few questions for thought leaders like Kevin. Throughout these webcasts, we're going to invite other practitioners, implementers, thought leaders to have a Q&A, open Q&A session on a particular topic. So today, I'm very happy to have Kevin join me. We're going to talk about the rise of the data-driven economy and the impact that we've started to see in the financial services sector. So with that, I'd like to kind of just start getting into this topic. I think just as a way of introduction, I've been doing a lot of reading, and probably most of you on this webcast have seen some of these different reports and findings out there. But this one, really caught my attention. It's from McKinsey Consulting. The value of data depends on the ultimate use and the ecosystems that are evolving to help companies capture the value. Data really is at the heart of a lot of these trends that we're seeing come to fruition and come to reality. And it's interesting to see how people manage, how people analyze the data is becoming so relevant in today's, across industries, and financial services is no different. Another interesting stat that I found, and this one actually is from a Gardner Report, that by 2022, more than 1 billion people will have some data about them stored on a blockchain and may not even be aware of it. So with this, I wanted to kind of open it up and have Kevin maybe walk us through some key questions that I had. And again, I want to invite you to ask us your questions as well. And so let's talk about this topic and some of these new trends like blockchain, cryptocurrency, and see what we can learn today from Kevin. So, Kevin, let's get started on some basic definitions just to bring us onto the same page. How do you define blockchain and cryptocurrency?
Okay, yeah, actually, Remy, thank you. Good morning, and it's good to join everyone in this conversation. In doing research, I had noticed that there are now hundreds, if not thousands, of blockchains that have been defined out there. Obviously the common and popular ones that everybody maybe has heard about, such as Bitcoin and Ethereum and Litecoin and Ripple, and even the government of Venezuela launched recently one called Petro, which is backed by, their petroleum reserves. So, everybody's kind of been jumping into, into the Bitcoin arena, so to speak. And really, of course, blockchain is a digital ledger, right, in which transactions can be made. Typically, of course, the origin was Bitcoin, and then other cryptocurrencies came into the fold. But really, in the financial services sector, what we're seeing is that in many cases, it's being used, as a distributed ledger technology, and to trace, transactions, financial transactions, to store customer data, and there's a lot of use cases which we'll get to later in the chat this morning. Okay, next slide.
Sure. So this really is about, kind of the blockchain and the role of data that it plays.
Yes, so of course, most of the blockchain projects that we're seeing in the financial and insurance sector are, projects or POCs where, the institutions, the enterprises are storing data on a blockchain on a distributed ledger, right? And so there's been, there's multiple aspects around this, the tokens, the distributed ledger itself, a mechanism to access and update and store the transactions, and to use this technology for contracts, for settlement. And so most of the projects in the financial services sector are storing this data on some sort of distributed ledger. I think the other thing, though, that we're seeing, we're still very, very early on in this, and we're still in the nascent part of this technology as applies to other use cases besides Bitcoin type use cases. So I think at this point, most enterprises are not ready to replace their traditional data stores. Typically what would be stored in a relational database with blockchain technology, but they're starting to experiment, and then actually some institutions, as we'll see, are quite well along.
So let me, actually that's a great transition into the next question. Clearly blockchain, cryptocurrency are these industry buzzwords all of us have been hearing about for the past, I'd say, especially in the last couple of years. You were alluding to it just now. What is the impact that they're having on the industry, the financial service industry, and the different sectors within this industry that you're seeing or reading about?
Yeah, once again, as I mentioned, I think we're still very early on in this. And in many cases, and in most countries, I'd say regulators and central banks are still very unsure about this technology, and they're very unsure, how to regulate it, how it should be appropriately used. So, most institutions are being very cautious. However, many institutions are dipping their toe in the water, and there's a lot of experimentation going on, as we'll talk about. So, this first point here, that Gardner makes is that really 85% of projects that have a blockchain name really aren't even using blockchain, right? They're delivering some sort of business value, but they're truly not using, blockchain technology under the covers. And because we are so very early on in the curve, really through the next 4 years, only 10% of enterprises are going to see actually radical transformation. I think we're still very much in that experimentation phase and proof of concept phase, as relates to blockchain technologies.
I think the next slide that that we have probably supports that even more so, and I think this is really from another industry analyst, Forrester, where they're stating essentially that the blockchain awareness is very high, but adoption is still minimal. With that said, though, I think there's still this expectation that these are still technologies that we are going to see more transformation coming out of. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that as people experiment, and as it shows here, there's still a lot of issues that still need to be ironed out, such as scalability, latency, interoperability. How do we use, how do we apply analytics in this space? But if you look, this information from Gardner, this chart from Gardner, we see, the 4 technologies that were named, on the chart that are going to be game changers, over the next few years. IoT, 3D printing, AI, and blockchain. Of course, I also have spent a lot of time working in the manufacturing vertical space. And of course, in that manufacturing vertical, IoT and 3D printing are very much technologies and applications that are on fire. People are, all kinds of projects going on in that space. In financial, certainly analytics, and as relates to, machine learning and deep learning, having enterprises be able to get the most value that's possible out of their data, and then very early on in the curve, this blockchain technology that we're talking about today. I think we'll see it applied in a lot of different areas. Trust and security is a big issue. Know your customer, being able to define your customer, and then new ways to define value through this technology. And I think we'll see that emerge over the next, 4 to 6 years.
That's very interesting. So, in terms of, I think that getting to the heart of what might help me kind of understand this is if you could share some of the common use cases that you might be seeing out there, and also, reading about, in terms of some of these early adopters or folks that are starting to dabble into what can blockchain do for them. Are there some common use cases that enterprises are looking at and ways that they can embrace blockchain technology that you could share with us?
Yeah, I think there are some common use cases, and we can we'll talk about those in just a second, but just to give you some examples, to give the audience some examples of some of the things that are going on, with some, institutions that are, of course, household names in North America. Bank of America has been very active in this space. They've already been granted, as it says here, 8 patents related to blockchain. They have an additional 53 patent applications that are pending and that are, going through the patent process. And so they've been very, very active in investing and being aggressive in this area. Here's a couple of examples of a couple of patents. One associated, the customer side that we spoke about a minute ago, know your customer. So, relationships between, customers and images or individuals and images. The second one that's listed here, a system for tracking and validating an entity in a process data network. So possibly, a contract or a settlement of some sort. So, they've been very aggressive, here in North America in investing in researching and preparing for the emergence of this technology.
So clearly, when you see names like Bank of America investing in this, they have an entire ecosystem that would obviously benefit from some of the investments that they're starting to make already, especially as they roll it out. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree. I think we're going to see some, we're at the very beginning of what's probably going to be a revolution over the next 10 years, right?
That sounds great. So maybe you could walk us through a few other things that you're starting to see out there.
Yeah, JPMorgan, for instance, they have created a network which is powered by what they're calling Quorum, which is Ethereum-based blockchain technology that they developed. And as it says here, this sourced by Reuters, they're investing millions of dollars in the technology, right? So once again, another example of a major financial institution in the United States making major investments in this area. And as Emma Loftus says here, rethinking how this technology can be applied for critical, customer information and financial information, tracking transactions in a secure fashion. So, I think that, another great example.
That's great.
And I think we have a third example, yes. CapitalOne, who, by the way, is also a Snowflake customer. Gil House, Senior Vice President from CapitalOne, stating that, they very definitely see benefits in blockchain technology, and but also saying they don't have something live today, but definitely, they're exploring it, investing in it, researching it, and figuring out ways that they can use this technology to apply to some of their business problems. And I think we have a question that came in on the chat. one of our listeners asked, once blockchain catches on further as a buzzword, would AI decline in popularity? I don't believe so. I think the two technologies are going to go hand in hand. I think we have exploding volumes of data in almost every industry, and so I think what we'll see is that traditional technologies, relational technologies, data warehouse technologies will coexist side by side with blockchain technologies, and each one applied to, the appropriate use case, right? So I don't see AI going away or machine learning, deep learning going away, or relational technologies. I see them coexisting in an ecosystem, at major financial institutions.
Yeah, I definitely agree. In fact, I think that I actually see them almost augmenting and enhancing each other, in terms of some of the capabilities. I mean, it's quite exciting to be, with all these different technologies and seeing the impacts on industries, on us as consumers, because I think that's the other thing is I think each one of these technology trends from a retail banking perspective, for example, like how they interact with the customer, that is transforming itself, and how they engage with us. So it's going to be quite exciting times, I think, in the coming years to see.
Yeah, Rumi, so, I think what we'll see is I think what we'll see is financial institutions and also in other industries, we'll see organizations applying the most appropriate technology to solve the most appropriate use case, right? And so this growing variety of very powerful technologies, relational technology, machine learning and deep learning, and now blockchain, each one will be used to solve the most appropriate use cases. I don't see one supplanting or taking out the other, so to speak.
That's very interesting. So, I think you alluded to this in some sample use cases. If you could just highlight a couple of them, and that would help kind of put this into context for many of us in terms of what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, I think we see, financial institutions applying, experimenting and doing proofs of concept with blockchain in some of the areas listed here. Risk management is a big area. It always has been. And so, we see them applying the technologies there. Obviously, in the know your customer, getting a 360 view of the customer in that area. In just the very, maybe more traditional trade execution and operation, so managing trades or, transactions, international transactions. We see that, a use case in several cases. And so, we see, and then security, of course, is a big issue because of the inherent security that comes in blockchain, right, in the blockchain technology. The fact that the files, once written are immutable, and so, you have kind of inherent built-in security there. So I think, we're seeing a variety of use cases emerge for this technology.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, one of the things, like especially in this day and age, security being one of the biggest drivers that I could see for, kind of pushing the blockchain technology to the forefront, right? Because as we're kind of concerned with that day in, day out, data, but no one person owns the blockchain, the entire blockchain, right? So that in itself, that inherent capability that the blockchain technology would provide is fantastic. Okay, so let's bring it back to a little bit about, so we both work at Snowflake Data Warehouse, so I just wanted to kind of think about the data warehouse and how, it can help to financial services customers really take advantage of some of these game-changing trends like AI and blockchain that we've been talking about today. Can you walk us through that in terms of some of the data warehouse needs and what you're seeing and hearing from?
Yes, I think, data warehousing is a technology that's been out there for, 35 to 40 years. I personally have been involved in data warehousing for about 21 years. And I think, we have a lot of the traditional technologies that were on premise. And I think what Snowflake kind of brings to the table, is now with the emergence of cloud technologies and all the power that can be leveraged in the cloud. And so Snowflake has taken advantage of that, the power that's inherent in the cloud. And it's a revolutionary technology because we have decoupled storage from compute. And so that's brought a lot of benefits, right, to what was traditional data warehousing technology, right? So the technology basically, allows us to basically support all types of data, including semi-structured as well as structured data, and that data can live, in the database side by side, in fact, in the same table in columns that are adjacent to each other, and that data can be joined together. And so, that's quite revolutionary. As we want to focus on knowing our customer, we want to be able to gather all the data about the customer, both the structured and the semi-structured data, and, marry that data and perform analytics on that data. I think the fact that this technology in the Snowflake technology stack, we've separated storage from compute, it allows us to scale either one or both on demand and independently one from the other. So, I don't have to go through that traditional pain of procuring an on-premise system that usually that takes, at the very least 3 to 4 months, usually 6 to 8 months to procure it, implement it, get it up and running. And so the ability to take advantage of that power of the cloud, right, to scale storage and compute independently. And then as my needs grow and evolve over time, if I need to add storage or add compute, I can do that actually at a moment's notice, right? And so, also the ability to serve all of my users and not have concurrency or contention issues because of the dynamic nature of the cloud. So I think we're seeing that, as we see emergence of technologies like blockchain and more, I would say, day-to-day use of technologies like machine learning and deep learning, we also see that the data warehouse technology has evolved dramatically in the last, 2 to 3 years. And so, there's a lot of use cases that weren't possible in traditional technologies, but now traditional on-premise data warehouse technologies that are now available in the cloud.
That's very interesting. So, as we, I do want to get to a couple of questions and want to be aware of time. So this has really been a great discussion. What recommendations do you have for enterprises looking to get started?
I think, as it relates to blockchain, certainly, I would recommend that you continue research in your organization, the applicability of this technology. Understand that, as customer data in particular begins to be more enriched, right, as we chatted about just a second ago, customer data is now enriched by both structured and unstructured data types. So really you have the ability to have a more complete view of your customer. The security policies and governance, that's still, open. As I mentioned at the very beginning, regulatory agencies are still maybe wary of blockchain technology. They're still trying to decide how they're going to regulate it, how they're going to control it. So there needs to be both internal policies within your organization and, governance structures, as well as interacting with, local and national regulators. And I think that, as these data stores become more common and more available, we need to understand, which use cases, should be applied to which technology, right? And adopt the most appropriate technology for the most appropriate use case.
So really, as I think what I'm hearing is, even though this blockchain technology is obviously still maturing, there's quite a few companies that are already investing in it, and these are not just any customer, but customers that are kind of at the top of the food chain that are making some serious investments in it, in terms of some of the things that you've shared with us. So it's really time for companies to all start evaluating the impacts of blockchain. Would you agree, and invest in kind of looking at different use cases and trials and things?
Yeah, I would definitely agree that most organizations need to at least be looking at the technology. They need to be evaluating it and trying to figure out what use cases would be most applicable. Maybe running, a POC or setting up, maybe in their advanced research department, I would say playing with the technology or running a small POC to kind of evaluate it and see how it best applies. As we've seen examples, the three examples we looked at, and there's a lot more of those out there, most major financial institutions are definitely sticking their toes in the water.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, Kevin. I think we do have a few questions that are coming in, and I encourage others to write in your questions. And let me wrap up, and I'm going to get back to you, Kevin, in a few minutes, in a minute or so, to ask you a couple of the questions that I've seen already. So with that, I wanted to really make sure that all of you are aware that there's a lot of information that we have on our website. If you wanted to know more about, this wasn't about Snowflake Data Warehouse, but if you wanted to know more about Snowflake, please do join us. And there's you can sign up for free right on our website itself. If you have additional questions beyond what we can cover today, please feel free to reach out to myself, Rimi Butra, or Kevin Maynor. Our email addresses are there. And with that, I'd like to kind of thank you, and we're going to take a few questions. Kevin, a couple questions have come in that I wanted to get to before we end, and I know we're running up to the hour, to the half hour very quickly. So this question comes in. We already have a data warehouse solution. It was implemented about 15 years ago. Is it still relevant, especially in light of these new technology trends that you've been describing today?
Yeah, I would say the data warehousing technology is still 100% relevant, and I say that because prior to the assignment that I'm currently on, I spent 2 years kind of working with large institutions all across the United States. And in the past 2 years, starting basically prior to January of this year, I visited 10 large companies across the United States, and in every single one, without exception, the vast majority of these organizations are spending much of their time doing data wrangling, and they're pulling data out of System A and System B and Database A and Database B, and then they're putting that data into an Excel spreadsheet, or they're putting it in some sort of other data store somewhere. And so, I saw that companies are still struggling with data management. And so I am more convinced than ever that data warehousing technology is still very, very relevant. People need to be able to store, their data in one place and have a single version of the truth and be able to, access that data confidently, 24/7, 365 without, the blockages of concurrency or scalability. And so, it's absolutely relevant. People still, data is becoming more and more important, and people need a reliable, data warehouse technology that they can answer their business questions on. So.
That's great, and it's very good to hear, and I'm glad that you were able to cover that. Now, we only have about a minute left, but I think people have really enjoyed hearing about the use cases, and perhaps in the future session we'll actually go through that in more detail. But in the next minute, could you give us another example of a use case that you're seeing out there that you think that the audience might benefit from hearing from before we wrap up, before we end this session?
Yeah, just very briefly, just a couple more examples to kind of show what folks are doing out there. One example, BNP Paribas is doing a pilot for internal use only so far, but in the international treasury management space. Another example, Northern Trust, has built a distributed ledger, and it's a solution for a private equity administration. We talked about JPMorgan, but they're working with, RBC, Royal Bank of Canada, and Australia, New Zealand Banking Group. And they're doing a payment processing network, based on their Quorum solution, which is the Ethereum-based quorum solution. So those are just a few, 3 more examples, and there's many others that we could cite. But everybody, as I said, is dabbling it. They're sticking their toe in the water. They're trying it against real-world use cases to see the applicability of this technology.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. I really appreciate your time and the insights that you've given us on this exciting topic. I hope you will join me again in a future session, because this has been very informative for myself and hopefully our audience as well, as this topic is very relevant in today's day and age. So thank you, Kevin, for joining me today.
Thank you, Remy. I appreciate it, and I hope it was valuable for our listeners today.
Very much. Thank you very much to our audience. This is Remy Butra, and we'll be closing off for today. But hopefully you can join us next month, as we want to keep this series going. Real Talk in Financial Services. We'll have a monthly session that we'd like to cover different topics. And as always, please feel free to ask us any questions even beyond this webcast. So thank you again. Bye-bye.